Imagine waking up in a hospital bed. The world is a blur of white sheets and muted beeps. Your own name a foreign word on a stranger's lips. Your past is a blank page. In a perfect world, a kind face would be waiting, a hand to hold, a voice to guide you back. But you probably wouldn't survive this world. You'd have forms to sign and bills to pay long before you remembered who you were supposed to pay them to. This is a story about a man who lost his memory, but found something far more valuable. It's a story about a daughter who was abandoned, but never stopped fighting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your city. Dr. Amelia Adisa moved through the sterile corridors of Lagos Central Hospital like a ghost in blue scrubs. Her steps were quiet, efficient. Her face a mask of professional calm that hid the exhaustion settled deep in her bones. At 28, she was one of the most promising residents in the cardiology unit, known for her steady hands and an unnerving ability to remain calm in the face of chaos. But outside these walls, her life was a study in silence. Her small apartment echoed with the absence of family. The only constant companion, a faded photograph of her mother and the half locket she wore around her neck. Its broken edge, a daily reminder of a story she only knew half of. The locket was her only inheritance, a small silver oval engraved with the words, "My dearest A." The rest of the name, like the other half of the locket, was missing. Lost to a past her mother refused to speak of until it was too late. Miles away, in a glass tower that pierced the Lagos skyline, Richard Ekwensi stared out at the city he owned. At 52, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name opened doors and silenced rooms. His business empire was vast, his wealth immeasurable. But his soul was a barren landscape. Since his first wife, Adana, had died in a fire 12 years ago, a part of him had died with her. He had remarried, of course. A man of his stature needed a partner. Isabella was perfect on paper, beautiful, sophisticated, and socially adept. But their marriage was a contract, a merger of interests, not of hearts. Their sprawling mansion in Banana Island felt less like a home and more like a museum, cold and beautiful and untouchable. Richard, darling, Isabella's voice, smooth as silk, cut through his thoughts from the doorway of his office. The charity gala is tonight. Don't forget, our table is next to the governor's. He nodded without turning. I won't be late. And Richard, she added, a slight edge to her tone, try to smile tonight. People are starting to talk. He didn't respond. The silence was his answer. The silence had been his answer for years. The rain started just as Richard's convoy left the island, a sudden, violent downpour that turned the streets into slick, black mirrors. His driver, James, navigated the treacherous traffic with practiced ease, but even he couldn't have anticipated the reckless Danfo bus that shot through a red light. The screech of tires was deafening. Metal screamed against metal. For a moment, the world was a kaleidoscope of shattering glass and blinding light. Then, there was only darkness. Back at Lagos Central, Amelia was finishing her 36-hour shift. The emergency room was a cacophony of controlled panic. A multi-car pileup on the 3rd Mainland Bridge had flooded the ER with casualties. She was triaging a patient with a minor head wound when the paramedics burst through the doors with a new arrival. 52-year-old male, single vehicle collision. The paramedic rattled off, unresponsive at the scene. GCS of 8. Severe head trauma. Amelia's eyes snapped to the man on the stretcher. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, now torn and stained with blood. His face was a mask of cuts and bruises, but even beneath the damage, there was an air of power about him. Another rich man, another tragedy. She went into autopilot, her training taking over. Get him to Trauma Bay 1. Now page neurosurgery and get me a full set of vitals, she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. As they rushed him down the hall, her hand brushed against his chest, her fingers catching on something cold and metallic beneath his shirt. She didn't have time to look. Right now, this man was just a patient. Another life suspended between this world and the next, and it was her job to pull him back. The hours that followed were a frantic ballet of medicine and mechanics. Under the harsh glare of the operating theater lights, Amelia and the neurosurgery team worked to relieve the pressure on Richard Equency's brain. She moved with a practiced precision that belied her exhaustion, her focus absolute. For those critical hours, he wasn't a billionaire or a business titan. He was a delicate network of nerves and vessels, and she was the architect of his survival. He made it through the surgery, a testament to his own resilience and the skill of the team. They moved him to the intensive care unit, a quiet room where machines breathed for him, charting the fragile rhythm of his life in glowing green lines. Amelia found herself unable to leave. Long after her shift had officially ended, she would stand by his bedside, checking his charts, monitoring his vitals, her professional duty blurring into something more personal. It was foolish, unprofessional even, but she felt a strange pull towards this stranger, a protective instinct that went beyond the Hippocratic oath. She would talk to him in the low tones, recounting her day, describing the city outside his window, anything to fill the silent, sterile air. "The rain has stopped," she murmured one evening, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. "They say the sky will be clear tomorrow." 3 days later, he woke up. It wasn't a dramatic gasp for air like in the movies, but a slow, quiet flutter of eyelids. Amelia was there, checking his pupillary response, when his eyes, a deep, startling brown, focused on her. They were empty, not vacant, but utterly blank, like a slate wiped clean. There was no recognition, no memory, only a profound and childlike confusion. "Who?" His voice was a dry rasp, the first word he had spoken. "You're in the hospital," Amelia said softly, keeping her voice calm and reassuring. "You were in an accident. You're safe now. My name is Dr. Adisa." He stared at her, the name meaning nothing to him. He tried to sit up, a flicker of panic in his eyes as he saw the tubes and wires connected to his body. Amelia gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. Just rest. We're taking care of you." In the days that followed, the diagnosis was confirmed: severe retrograde amnesia. Richard Equency, the man who held a corporate empire in his mind, couldn't remember his own name, let alone his address or the empire he commanded. Amelia became his anchor in a sea of confusion. She was the first face he saw in the morning and the last at night. She explained every procedure, answered every repeated question with infinite patience, and slowly, a fragile trust began to form. It was in the small gestures, the way he furrowed his brow when trying to remember something, a fleeting expression that tugged at a memory she couldn't place, or the way he would unconsciously clutch the chain around his neck, as if seeking comfort from something hidden beneath his hospital gown. She felt an inexplicable warmth towards him, a sense of familiarity that made no logical sense. Then, Isabella arrived. She didn't walk into the ICU, she made an entrance. Dressed in a Chanel suit the color of cream, with perfectly coiffed hair and a scent of expensive perfume that cut through the sterile hospital air, she was the picture of concerned elegance. She swept past the nurse's station, her heels clicking authoritatively on the linoleum floor. "I am Isabella Equency," she announced to the head nurse, her voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I am here to see my husband." Amelia was in Richard's room when she entered. Isabella paused at the doorway, her eyes, as dark and polished as obsidian, sweeping over the scene. She took in the sight of Amelia adjusting Richard's pillow, the quiet intimacy of the room, and her perfectly painted lips thinned into a line of displeasure. Richard looked at her with the same blank confusion he showed everyone else. "Darling," Isabella cooed, rushing to his bedside and taking his hand. "It's me. Your wife. Oh, thank God you're awake." Her performance was flawless. Tears welled in her eyes as she stroked his forehead, her voice trembling with manufactured relief. But when her gaze met Amelia's over Richard's head, the warmth vanished, replaced by an Arctic chill. "You're the resident, I presume?" she asked, the title sounding like an insult. "I'm Dr. Adisa. I've been overseeing Mr. Equency's care," Amelia replied, maintaining her professional composure. "I see," Isabella said, her tone dismissive. "Well, I'm here now. The family will be handling his affairs. You can forward all updates to me directly." She turned her attention back to Richard, completely dismissing Amelia as if she were a piece of furniture. Amelia felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't just the arrogance of a rich woman used to getting her way. It was something else, something territorial, almost fearful. Why would this woman, who was supposedly overjoyed to see her husband awake, treat his primary doctor with such immediate hostility? Over the next few hours, Amelia watched as Isabella took control. She fielded calls from business associates, consulted with the hospital administrator, and spoke to Richard in a tone that was both overly sweet and subtly condescending. But Amelia noticed the cracks in the facade. Isabella rarely touched her husband unless someone was watching. She spent more time on her phone in the corner of the room than she did speaking to him, and she never once asked Richard how he was feeling, only when he would be back to normal. The suspicion in Amelia's gut grew stronger. This wasn't the behavior of a worried, loving wife. This was the behavior of a woman protecting an investment. As Amelia prepared to leave for the night, she overheard Isabella speaking to someone on the phone in a hushed, irritated whisper. "No, he doesn't remember anything. Yes, that's good for us, but it's a complication. Just keep things quiet on your end. The last thing we need is for someone from his past to show up now." Amelia froze just outside the door, her heart pounding. Good for us. Someone from his past. The words echoed in her mind, confirming her unease. Isabella Equency wasn't just cold, she was hiding something. And whatever it was, Amelia had a gut feeling it was connected to the man in the hospital bed, the man she felt a strange, impossible connection to. The discovery happened on a Tuesday, during the quiet lull of the afternoon shift change. Amelia was conducting a routine check, a small moment of normalcy in the disorienting world Richard now inhabited. He was stronger today, sitting propped up against the pillows, his gaze less clouded as he watched her change the dressing on a minor abrasion on his arm. He still couldn't recall his own life, but he remembered her. Her name was Amelia. She was kind. In the sterile landscape of the hospital, she was the only landmark he recognized. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her touch gentle as she applied a fresh bandage. He shook his head, his eyes following her movements. "No, thank you." He often said that. The words imbued with a gratitude so profound, it made her chest ache. He was thanking her not just for the medical care, but for being a steady presence in his storm of nothingness. As she finished, she noticed him unconsciously reaching for the chain around his neck, a habit she'd seen countless times. His fingers closed around the lump hidden beneath his hospital gown. It was a nervous tick, a self-soothing gesture. Today, however, as he shifted, the object slipped out from under the gown, resting against his collarbone. Amelia froze. Her hands, which had been so steady moments before, began to tremble. It was half a locket, an oval piece of silver, tarnished with age, its edge jagged and broken. It was identical to the one she wore, the one that was currently tucked beneath her scrubs, resting warm against her own skin. Time seemed to stop. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor faded into a distant hum. All she could see was that broken piece of silver, a mirror image of the secret she had carried her entire life. "This," Richard murmured, his voice pulling her back. He picked up the half locket, his thumb tracing its broken edge. "I don't know what it is, but it feels important." Amelia couldn't speak. Her throat was tight, her lungs devoid of air, with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. She reached under the collar of her scrubs and pulled out her own necklace. The chain was thinner, more delicate, but the pendant hanging from it was the other half. She held it out, her palm shaking. Richard stared at the piece of silver in her hand. His brow furrowed in confusion. He looked from her locket to his, then back again. Slowly, as if guided by an instinct older than memory. He held his half out. The two pieces clicked together, fitting with a seamless precision that stole the breath from Amelia's lungs. They were a perfect whole. But it was the inscription that shattered her world. On her half, the looping cursive read, "Always my." On his, the script continued, completing the phrase, "Daughter. Always my daughter." The words burned into her mind, a revelation so cataclysmic it felt like a physical blow. This man, this patient, this stranger with no memory was her father. The father who had vanished before she was born. The father her mother had mourned in silence. The father who was a ghost, a myth, a blank space in her life story. And he was here. He was alive. He was in her care. And he had no idea. Richard stared at the completed locket, his expression a mixture of awe and bewilderment. "Daughter?" he whispered, the word a question, a statement, a fragment of a life he couldn't grasp. He looked up at Amelia, his eyes searching hers for an answer he didn't know he was looking for. Amelia quickly pulled the lockets apart, tucking hers back under her scrubs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't do this. Not here, not now. He was her patient. She had a professional duty, but how could she be a doctor to the man who was the source of her deepest wound? At that very moment, Isabella swept into the room, her sharp eyes immediately landing on the scene. She saw the locket still in Richard's hand, saw the raw emotion on Amelia's face before she could mask it, and saw the charged silence that hung between them. Isabella's practiced smile tightened. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice dangerously sweet. "No," Amelia said, turning away and busying herself with Richard's chart, her hands still shaking. "I was just finishing my rounds." "I see," Isabella said, her gaze lingering on Amelia for a moment too long. She saw the locket, the tears threatening to spill from the doctor's eyes, and the dazed look on Richard's face. She didn't know what it meant, but she recognized a threat when she saw one. The bond between her amnesiac husband and this overly attentive resident was growing stronger, and it was a complication she could not afford. This girl was a loose thread in the carefully woven fabric of her life, and loose threads had a way of unraveling everything. As Amelia quickly excused herself from the room, Isabella watched her go, a cold resolve forming in her mind. This Dr. Adisa had to go. Later that afternoon, Isabella made her way to the hospital administrator's office. She sat gracefully in the leather chair, her hands folded demurely in her lap. "Mr. Adebayo," she began, her voice a mask of concerned sincerity. "I am becoming increasingly worried about my husband's care." The administrator leaned forward, his expression serious. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Equency? Our staff is the best in the city." "Oh, I have no doubt about their qualifications," Isabella said smoothly. "But Dr. Adisa, she seems to have formed a rather intense attachment to my husband. Her presence seems to agitate him. He becomes confused, distressed. I worry her unprofessional emotional involvement is hindering his recovery." She let the words hang in the air, a carefully planted seed of doubt. "For my husband's sake," she concluded, her voice trembling slightly, "I must insist that she be reassigned." Isabella knew how these things worked. A complaint from the wife of a billionaire patient was not something the hospital could ignore. The plan to remove Amelia was now in motion. Amelia was blindsided when the hospital administrator called her into his office the next morning. She had spent a sleepless night wrestling with the monumental discovery, her mind a whirlwind of shock, grief, and a bewildering sense of connection. Seeing Richard, her father, had been a surreal, earth-shattering event. Now, facing Mr. Adebayo's grave expression, she felt a new wave of dread wash over her. "Dr. Adisa," he began, his tone formal and distant. "We've received a formal complaint regarding your over-involvement with Mr. Equency's case." Amelia's heart sank. "A complaint from whom his wife has expressed concerns that your emotional attachment is having a negative impact on his recovery," Mr. Adebayo stated, avoiding her eyes. "Effective immediately, you are being reassigned. Dr. Okoro will be taking over as Mr. Equency's primary physician." The words felt like a slap. Reassigned, banned from seeing the father she had just found. "But that's not true," she stammered. "My care has been nothing but professional. His condition has been steadily improving. My hands are tied." "Amelia," the administrator said, a hint of regret in his voice, "the Equency family are major donors to this hospital. We cannot afford to alienate them." Amelia walked out of his office in a daze. Isabella had done this. The woman had seen the connection, felt the threat, and acted swiftly to sever it. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just removed a doctor. She had torn a daughter away from her father at the very moment of their reunion. But as the initial shock subsided, a quiet, steely resolve began to form within her. She would not let this woman win. She had found her father, and she would not lose him again. Amelia made a conscious, painful decision. She would not reveal her identity. Not yet. Her father's mind was a fragile landscape, and dropping a bombshell of this magnitude could cause irreparable damage. More importantly, she realized with a pang of longing, she wanted him to know her first. She wanted him to see Amelia, the dedicated doctor, the kind woman, before he saw the daughter he never knew he had. She wanted to earn his affection, not demand it through a biological claim. Her plan was simple. She would find a way to stay in his life, to watch over him from a distance, and to wait for the right moment. She started by befriending the junior nurses on the ICU floor, sharing her lunch with them, offering to cover small tasks, and casually asking about the VIP in room 302. They were happy to share updates, unaware of her personal connection. "He's been asking for you," a young nurse named Bola told her one afternoon. "He keeps telling Dr. Okoro that he wants the kind doctor back. Mrs. Equency gets furious every time he mentions you." The news was a small comfort, a flicker of light in her frustration. He remembered her. He missed her. Meanwhile, a fragile relationship began to blossom in room 302. Richard, lost without his familiar doctor, grew to enjoy the quiet moments when Amelia would happen to be passing by. She would slip in for a few minutes when Isabella was away, bringing him a book from the hospital library, or simply sitting with him in comfortable silence. He didn't question how she got there. He was just grateful for her presence. "It's quieter when you're here," he told her one day, his voice stronger than it had been. "I'm glad I can help," she'd replied, her heart swelling. During these stolen moments, she learned about the man, not the myth. He had a dry sense of humor, a love for old jazz music, and a surprising gentleness. He spoke of a life he couldn't remember, but felt in fragments, a love for the sea, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the memory of a woman's laughter. Amelia would listen, her heart aching, recognizing echoes of stories her own mother used to tell. He was piecing together his soul, and she was the silent keeper of its most important missing piece. Isabella, however, was not blind to these clandestine meetings. The nurses, loyal to their hospital's benefactors, reported Amelia's visits. Isabella's anger simmered. She had underestimated this doctor's persistence. The girl was not just emotionally attached, she was insubordinate and a direct threat to her authority. Isabella knew Richard's amnesia was a double-edged sword. It protected her from his memories of his first wife and daughter, but it also made him a blank canvas, susceptible to new influences. And Amelia was painting a masterpiece of trust and affection on that canvas. Isabella had to escalate her plan. She could no longer rely on hospital bureaucracy. She needed to take direct action. She needed to break the bond between them for good. She decided it was time for the Richgerd to go home, back to the mansion where she could control every aspect of his environment, every person he saw, every word he heard, away from the prying eyes of the hospital, and, most importantly, away from the dangerous, lingering presence of Dr. Amelia Adisa. Isabella orchestrated Richard's discharge with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. Against the medical advice of Dr. Okoro, who argued he still needed observation, she signed the release papers, citing the superior care he would receive at home with a private nursing team. It was a lie, and everyone knew it, but her authority as his wife was absolute. The mansion, which Amelia had only glimpsed in news articles, now became the fortress that kept her from her father. Amelia's stolen moments were gone. The updates from the nurses became less frequent, more guarded. Isabella had installed her own staff, a team loyal only to her. Richard was effectively a prisoner in his own home, and Amelia was locked out. The helplessness was a familiar, bitter taste in her mouth, reminiscent of a childhood spent wondering about a father she couldn't reach. But Isabella's plan went beyond mere isolation. She needed to erase Amelia from Richard's mind completely, and if that failed, she would paint her as a villain. Her opportunity came a week after Richard's return to the mansion. She knew he had a follow-up appointment at the hospital for a routine blood test. It was a small, insignificant event, but Isabella saw it as a stage for her next move. The plan was cruel in its simplicity. She acquired a vial of a mild anticoagulant, a blood thinner that wouldn't cause serious harm in a small dose, but would produce alarming test results. The night before the appointment, while Richard slept, she carefully injected a small amount into the IV bag of saline hydration that his private nurse administered. She knew the hospital would run a full coagulation panel. The abnormal results would point directly to a medication error, a mistake made during his initial hospital stay. At the same time, she began her psychological assault. "Darling," she would say to Richard during their sterile evenings together, her voice dripping with false concern. "That Dr. Adisa from the hospital, the one you were so fond of. I've heard some unsettling things. They say she was disciplined for carelessness with patient medications before." Richard, his memory still a fog, would frown. "She seemed competent." "Oh, she's charming. I'll grant you that." Isabella would concede with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But charm doesn't make a good doctor. Competence does. It's a good thing we brought you home when we did." The day of the appointment, Isabella ensured she was by Richard's side, the picture of a doting wife. When the lab results came back, she feigned shock and horror perfectly. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising as she confronted Dr. Okoro in the hospital corridor. "His blood is too thin. He could have bled to death. What kind of incompetence is this?" Dr. Okoro was baffled. "I don't understand. We haven't administered any anticoagulants." "Well, someone did." Isabella's eyes narrowed, landing on a nearby nurse. "It was that other doctor. Wasn't it Dr. Adisa? She was the one managing his IVs during the first week. This is her fault. This is medical negligence." The accusation, made publicly and with such conviction, was devastating. An immediate internal investigation was launched. Amelia's name was now tied to a potentially life-threatening medical error involving a high-profile patient. Her colleagues looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The walls of her professional life, the one thing she had built for herself, were beginning to crumble. Amelia knew, with a sickening certainty, that Isabella had framed her. There was no other explanation, but she had no proof. It was her word against the powerful, grieving wife of a billionaire. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for was now on the line. The final blow came not from the hospital, but from Richard himself. A few days after the incident, Amelia received a letter delivered by a courier. It was a cease and desist, written on the formal letterhead of Richard Equency's legal team. "Dr. Adisa, it has come to my attention that your negligent care during my hospital stay has caused significant complications to my health. Furthermore, my wife has informed me of your continued and unwelcome attempts to contact me. You are hereby instructed to cease all contact immediately. Any further attempts to approach me or my family will be met with legal action." The letter was unsigned, dictated, of course, but the words were a dagger to Amelia's heart. Isabella had not only poisoned his body with her drugs, she had poisoned his mind against her. He didn't just not know she was his daughter. He now believed she was his enemy. Amelia sank into a chair in her small apartment, the lawyer's letter trembling in her hand. The broken locket around her neck felt impossibly heavy. She had found her father only to lose him in the most painful way imaginable. Not to death, but to a web of lies she had no power to untangle. All hope seemed lost. For 2 weeks, Amelia existed in a fog of despair. The hospital's investigation was a slow, suffocating process. She was placed on administrative leave, a gentle term for a professional quarantine. The whispers in the hallways followed her like shadows. Her friends were supportive, but even they couldn't fully grasp the insidious nature of what was happening. "It's just a mistake, Amelia," they'd say. "They'll clear it up." But Amelia knew this was no mistake. It was a perfectly executed assassination of her character. The isolation was the worst part. She was cut off from her father, who was now being fed a steady diet of Isabella's poison. His health, which had been improving under her care, was now a mystery. According to the official hospital reports, she could still access. His physical recovery was progressing, but his neurological reports showed stagnation. He wasn't getting worse, but he wasn't getting better either. His memory remained a blank, a canvas Isabella was free to paint with whatever lies she chose. It was during one of these long, empty afternoons that Amelia hit her lowest point. She sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by medical textbooks she couldn't bring herself to open, the legal letter from her father's lawyers lying on the coffee table like a tombstone. She felt the same crushing helplessness she'd felt as a child, listening to her mother weep softly at night for a husband she would never explain. She had lost Isabella. With her money, power, and ruthless cunning, had won. Just as she was about to surrender to the despair, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She ignored it, but it rang again, persistent. With a sigh, she answered, her voice flat. "Hello. Is this Dr. Adisa?" a man's voice asked, hesitant but kind. "Who is this?" "My name is James Adebayo. I'm Mr. Aquency's driver." Amelia sat up, her heart suddenly pounding. "Is he okay? Is something wrong?" "He's the same, ma'am," James said, his voice low, as if he was afraid of being overheard. "But that's not why I'm calling. I know what's happening. I know what she's doing to you." "What do you mean?" Amelia asked, her breath catching. "I've worked for Mr. Richard for 15 years, James explained. "He's a good man, a hard man, sometimes, but fair. This is not him. And that woman, she's not who she pretends to be." There was a pause. "I overheard her on the phone the other day. She was talking to someone about the hospital incident. She was laughing. Ma'am? She said her little chemistry experiment worked perfectly." The confirmation sent a jolt of adrenaline through Amelia. "Can you prove it?" "Not that conversation," James admitted. "But I have other things. I've seen things. I'm not a fool. Mr. Richard. He changed after his first wife died. He closed himself off. It made him vulnerable. Isabella. She came into his life when he was at his lowest. I never trusted her." A spark of hope, fierce and desperate, ignited within Amelia. "Why are you telling me this, James?" "Because I see the way he looked when you were around at the hospital," the driver said simply. "I haven't seen him look that peaceful since the first madam was alive. He deserves better. And you? You don't deserve this." Amelia's mind began to race, the fog of her despair starting to clear. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had an ally, someone on the inside. "James," she said, her voice firm now, the doctor in her taking over. "We need to be smart. We need proof that Isabella can't dismiss or deny. Can you help me?" "Anything, ma'am. For Mr. Richard?" "I need access," Amelia said, a plan starting to form. "Not to the mansion. That's too risky. I need information. Does he have a private office at the mansion, one that she doesn't go into?" "Yes, his old study. It's on the ground floor. He hasn't used it much since the accident. She never goes in there. Says it's full of sad old memories." "Is there a security system?" "Of course, state of the art. But..." James hesitated. "I know the codes. He trusted me with everything." Amelia's pulse quickened. "Okay, James, this is what we're going to do." The plan they hatched was risky, bordering on illegal, but it was their only shot. James, citing a need for routine maintenance on the security system, was able to disable the cameras in the study for a 2-hour window without raising suspicion. He also provided Amelia with a detailed layout of the ground floor and the staff's schedule. Her window of opportunity was Thursday afternoon, when Isabella had her weekly spa appointment and the private nurse took her break. On Thursday, Amelia felt like a spy in her own life. Dressed in a nondescript tracksuit and a baseball cap, she slipped through a side gate that James had left unlocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crept through the manicured gardens. The opulence of the estate, a stark contrast to the grimy reality of her mission. She entered the mansion through a service door, her movements swift and silent. James's map committed to memory. The study was just as he had described: dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a heavy mahogany desk. It smelled of old leather and Richard's faint, familiar cologne. It felt like stepping into the very heart of the man himself. For a moment, she was overwhelmed, but the urgency of her task pushed her forward. She didn't have much time. She started with his desk, searching for anything that might give her leverage. Financial statements, legal documents, anything Isabella might be hiding. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old company reports, she found it. A slim, leather-bound journal. It was his. The handwriting was strong and decisive. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The last entry was dated the day before the accident. Isabella is pushing for the merger with Petrocorp again. Something feels off. Her contact there, a man named Victor, has a shady reputation. She insists it's the deal of a lifetime, but my gut tells me she's hiding something. She's been careless with her phone lately. Saw a text from him last night. The package is ready. He'll never see it coming. What package? Amelia's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a medical error. This was bigger, more dangerous. She quickly took photos of the journal entry with her phone. As she was about to leave, her eyes fell on a small, silver-framed photograph on the corner of the desk, turned face down. She picked it up. It was a picture of a beautiful, smiling woman with kind eyes, holding a newborn baby. The woman was Adana, her mother. The baby was her, and standing beside them, his arm wrapped protectively around them, was a young Richard, his face alight with a joy so pure it was almost painful to see. He had loved them. He had been there. So what happened? Why did he leave? The questions burned, but she had no time for them now. She tucked the photo into her pocket and slipped out of the mansion as silently as she had arrived, her mission accomplished, but her heart heavier than ever. The photograph felt like a burning ember in Amelia's pocket as she made her way back to the city. The joyful face of the young Richard in the picture was a stark, painful contrast to the blank, memory-wiped man now living under Isabella's control. He hadn't abandoned them out of cruelty. He had loved them. The narrative of her life, the one she had constructed around a faceless, heartless father, had just been irrevocably shattered. There was a secret here, a lie bigger and darker than she could have imagined. She met James that evening at a quiet, roadside buka. The steam from hot amala and the scent of uwedu soup, a grounding contrast to the day's sterile, high-stakes espionage. She showed him the photos of the journal entry. He read the words, his face grim. Victor, no. I've heard her mention that name. He's some kind of financial consultant from Eastern Europe. He's been to the house a few times. James, this is more than just framing me, Amelia said, her voice low and urgent. She was planning something against him before the accident. The package is ready. He'll never see it coming. That sounds like a threat. James nodded slowly. It does. And the merger she was pushing. Petrocorp is a notoriously corrupt company. Mr. Richard always refused to do business with them. He said their ethics were flexible. She was trying to get him to sign a deal he would never have agreed to. Amelia pieced it together. The accident must have been a setback for her. But the amnesia, it became an opportunity, a chance to control him completely, and to get rid of anyone who stood in her way, James added, looking at Amelia with a new level of concern. Like you. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling between them. They were no longer just trying to clear Amelia's name. They were trying to uncover a conspiracy. "There's more," Amelia said, her voice trembling slightly. She pulled out the silver-framed photograph of her parents and her as a baby. James stared at it, his eyes widening in shock. He looked from the photo to Amelia, his mind clearly struggling to connect the dots. This is the first Madam Adana, and that's me," Amelia finished for him. "James, he was there. He was my father. He didn't leave." The old driver's eyes filled with tears. He covered his mouth with a hand, his shoulders shaking. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew there was something. The way he looked at you, it was like he was remembering a song he'd forgotten the words to." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and profound sadness. "He thought you both died. In the fire at the old beach house?" Amelia's head snapped up. "What fire? My mother and I never lived in a beach house. We lived with her sister in Surulere until she died." Now it was James's turn to be confused. But that's the story he was told. That's the story everyone was told. After you were born, Madame Adana took you to the family's beach house for a few weeks to get away from the city. Then there was a fire, a terrible one. The house burned to the ground. They said they found remains. Mr. Richard was in London for business. By the time he got back, it was all over. He was never the same after that. A chilling realization washed over Amelia. The fire, the story of their deaths. It was all a lie constructed to separate her father from his wife and child. But who would do such a thing, and why Isabella? Amelia breathed, the name tasting like poison. She knew him back then, didn't she, James? James frowned, thinking back. Yes. She was a family friend. Her father was a minor business partner of Mr. Richard's. She was always around, especially after the fire. She was very supportive. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of monstrous, long-term deception. Isabella hadn't just appeared in Richard's life after his loss. She had been waiting in the wings, perhaps even orchestrating the entire tragedy. "We need proof," Amelia said, her voice hardening. "We need something that connects Isabella to that fire, to the lie that my mother and I were dead." James thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "The old house files. Mr. Richard keeps everything. Deeds, insurance policies, police reports. They might be in the main safe at the office, not the one in the study. Can you get to them?" "It's harder," James admitted. "The codes were changed after Isabella moved in. She and the head of security are the only ones with access." "Then we find another way," Amelia said, her resolve unshakable. She wouldn't just clear her name now. She would reclaim her father's past and expose the woman who had stolen it. Their new plan required a different kind of infiltration. Amelia, armed with the knowledge from Richard's journal, began to dig into Petrocorp and the mysterious Victor. She spent hours in the library's business archives, her medical research skills proving surprisingly useful in navigating complex corporate structures. She discovered a web of shell companies and offshore accounts, all linked to Victor, and all showing a pattern of asset stripping and hostile takeovers. Meanwhile, James worked his own angle. He used his long-standing, unassuming presence in the Aquency household to his advantage. He was the loyal driver, invisible, and therefore able to overhear things. He learned that Isabella was planning a large, lavish party at the mansion to celebrate Richard's recovery. It was a PR move designed to show the world and the company's board that everything was back to normal, with her firmly in control. "The party is our chance," James told Amelia during another clandestine meeting. "Security will be focused on the guests. The staff will be distracted. The main office, where the safe is, will be empty." The night of the party was a spectacle of wealth and power. Lagos high society turned out in full force, the mansion glittering with diamonds and champagne. Amelia watched from a service vehicle parked down the street, her heart pounding. James, in his crisp driver's uniform, blended in perfectly, ferrying guests from the gate to the main entrance. Inside, Isabella was in her element, the perfect hostess, while Richard stood beside her, smiling politely but with vacant eyes, a handsome prop in the drama of his own life. At exactly 10 p.m., as the party reached its peak, James made his move. He slipped away from the chaos and made his way to Richard's main office. As he worked on the safe's electronic keypad, using a device Amelia had procured through a tech-savvy hospital colleague, Amelia kept watch on a live feed from a micro camera James had placed in the hallway. Her breath hitched every time a guest wandered too close. Finally, a soft click. The safe was open. "I'm in," James whispered into his comms device. Amelia's eyes were glued to the screen. "Quickly, James, the fire report. Look for anything dated 12 years ago." Inside the cold steel of the safe, James's gloved fingers moved with a frantic urgency. He bypassed stacks of stock certificates and property deeds, his eyes scanning for the specific file they needed. "Beach house, Epe." "Fire investigation," he muttered, finally pulling out a thick, dust-covered folder. He didn't have time to read it. He simply took photos of every single page with a burner phone, his movements economical and swift. "I've got it," he whispered to Amelia. "Police report, insurance claim, coroner's summary." "Is there anything else?" Amelia pressed, her eyes still glued to the camera feed. "Anything personal? A letter, a diary?" James rummaged deeper. At the very back, tucked inside an old leather portfolio, was a small bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. He quickly took a picture of the top one. The handwriting was feminine, elegant. "My dearest Richard," it began. "It's from Adana," he breathed. "Letters from your mother to him." "Get out of there now, James," Amelia commanded, her voice tight. "Someone's coming." Nah, on the screen, she could see two of Isabella's private security guards walking down the hallway, their expressions bored, but their movements methodical. James didn't hesitate. He slipped the folder back, closed the safe, and was out of the office and melting back into the party's chaos seconds before the guards turned the corner. Back in the safety of her apartment, Amelia and James huddled over the downloaded images. The police report was brief, almost suspiciously so. It concluded the fire was accidental, caused by faulty wiring. The coroner's report was even more disturbing. It listed two sets of remains, one adult female, one infant, both burned beyond recognition. Dental records were cited as the primary means of identification for her mother. "But my mother had perfect teeth," Amelia whispered, a cold dread seeping into her. "She never even had a filling." James zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the report. Dr. A. Bello. "I know that name," he said, frowning. "He was a private doctor the family used sometimes. He lost his license a few years ago. Scandal. Falsifying medical records for insurance fraud. The pieces were not just connecting. They were forming a monstrous mosaic of deceit. The fire, the reports, the doctor, it was all a setup. But the letters, They were the heart of the story. Amelia read them, her vision blurring with tears. They were love letters, filled with Adana's joy about her new baby, her loneliness while Richard was away, her plans for their future. The last one, however, was different. It was dated the day before the fire. Richard, my love, I'm worried. Isabella was here today. She was asking strange questions about the house's security, about your travel schedule. She said she was just concerned for our safety, but there was a coldness in her eyes I've never seen before. She gave me a gift for the baby, a small silver rattle. It's beautiful, but something about it feels wrong. I know I'm probably just being a nervous new mother, but please, call me as soon as you get this. I feel watched. Amelia dropped the phone. The letter was proof. Isabella had been at the house right before the fire, her intentions sinister. This was what they needed. Amelia's mind, sharpened by years of medical diagnosis, now worked like a detective's. James, Isabella is a planner. She wouldn't have done this alone. She needed help. The corrupt doctor, the security guards who let her wander the beach house, maybe even someone in the police force who signed off on a shoddy investigation. We need to find the weakest link. Their investigation intensified. Amelia, using her hospital credentials, accessed archived medical records and discovered that Dr. Bello had received a massive, untraceable payment into an offshore account the week after the fire. James, using his network of contacts in the city's underbelly, found a retired security guard who had worked at the beach house. After some persuasion and a significant cash payment from a fund Amelia had established from her own savings, the old guard talked. She paid us to look the other way, he confessed, his voice raspy with guilt. Mrs. Isabella. She said she was just playing a prank on her friend, Madame Adana, that she was going to stage a small emergency to convince Mr. Richard to improve the security. We didn't know. We never thought, He trailed off, his eyes haunted. They had the motive. They had the co-conspirators. Now they needed to expose it all. Amelia knew a direct confrontation would fail. Isabella would lie, manipulate, and turn it all back on her. They needed a stage, an audience, and an undeniable trigger for Richard's memory. The annual Equency Foundation Gala, Amelia said, the idea taking shape. It's in 2 weeks. It's the one event Richard never misses. It was founded in my mother's memory. Isabella will be there, playing the role of the supportive wife, James added, catching on. She'll be at her most confident, her most vulnerable. Amelia looked at the photo of her and her parents, her heart filled with a fierce, protective love. She thinks she buried my mother's memory, but I'm going to make sure my mother's voice is the loudest one in that room. The plan was audacious. James would work on getting the retired guard and a recording of his confession. Amelia would prepare a presentation, the falsified reports, the bank transfers to Dr. Bello, the love letters all culminating in the final, damning note from her mother. But the centerpiece, the trigger, would be something only a daughter would know. My mother had a song, Amelia told James, her eyes distant. A lullaby. She used to hum it to me in the cradle. It was her own composition. Richard would know it. It was their song. She spent the next week with a music therapist, a friend from the hospital, recreating the melody from fragmented childhood memories. It was a haunting, beautiful tune that felt both like a memory and a premonition. The stage was being set for a final, public reckoning. The Equency Foundation Gala was Isabella's masterpiece of hypocrisy. The grand ballroom of the Echo Hotel was draped in white and silver, Adana's favorite colors. A towering portrait of Richard's first wife, Her smile, warm and genuine, presided over the entrance, a cruel, silent witness to the evening's charade. Richard stood by Isabella's side, a handsome, hollow marionette. He smiled when prompted, shook hands when guided, his eyes holding the distant, placid emptiness of a man lost in a fog. Isabella, too, dripping in diamonds, was radiant. She was the gracious hostess, the grieving widow's successor, the powerful woman who had resurrected the Equency Foundation in Adana's loving memory. More to the oblivious Lagos elite, she was a paragon of virtue. Amelia did not enter through the grand ballroom doors. Now, she came in through a service entrance, guided by James, who had arranged for her to have a staff pass. She wore a simple, elegant dark blue gown, no jewelry save for the half locket hidden beneath the fabric. She looked not like a guest, but like a shadow with a purpose. She found a spot at the back of the room, near the sound engineering booth, and waited. Her heart was a steady, rhythmic drum against her ribs. Fear had been burned away, replaced by a cold, righteous fire. The evening progressed with practiced elegance. Speeches were made. Donations were pledged. Finally, Isabella took the stage for the keynote address. Her voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, was a symphony of feigned sincerity. Adana was more than a friend. She began, a delicate hand placed over her heart. She was a light tragically extinguished too soon, in her memory. We continue her work, ensuring that her legacy of kindness lives on. As the audience began a polite, conditioned applause, the event coordinator stepped to the microphone. And now, we have a surprise tribute, a special performance dedicated to the memory of Adana Equency. Isabella frowned, caught off guard. This wasn't on the program. From the back of the room, Amelia began to walk forward. A single spotlight, prearranged by James with a bribed technician, found her, bathing her in a solitary beam of light as she ascended the stage. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Who was this woman? Amelia took the microphone, her hand steady. She didn't look at Isabella, whose face was a mask of controlled fury. She looked at Richard. There was a song, Amelia said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent room. A song my mother wrote for her child. And then she began to sing. It was not a performance. It was a prayer, a memory-given voice. The melody was simple, a haunting lullaby that was achingly familiar. Across the room, Richard's polite smile faltered. He blinked, his head tilting slightly, as if trying to catch a sound from a distant dream. Sleep now, my star. The moon is high. Amelia's voice, pure and clear, wrapped around him. He saw a flash of memory, brief and intense. A woman's laughter on a windy beach, the smell of salt in the air. The ocean whispers, "You and I?" His hand went to his chest, his fingers searching for the locket beneath his tuxedo. Another flash, the weight of a tiny, sleeping baby in his arms, her breath warm against his neck. He looked at Amelia on the stage, her face illuminated, and for the first time, he didn't just see a doctor. He saw a ghost of a memory, a familiarity that made his heart ache. As the final verse began, Amelia reached up and pulled the half locket from under her dress, holding it up so it caught the light. Though storms may come and winds may blow, my love's a light to guide you home. Richard's eyes locked onto the locket. His own hand, as if with a will of its own, pulled his half out. He stared at it, then back at her. The two broken pieces, separated by a chasm of lies and 12 stolen years. And then the dam broke. A tidal wave of memory crashed over him. The fire, the funeral, the signed reports, Isabella's comforting hand on his arm, her words. She's gone, Richard. They're both gone. And then, Adana's last letter, her fear, Isabella's visit, the silver rattle. He remembered everything. Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. The entire ballroom gasped. He wasn't looking at Amelia anymore. His gaze, now blazing with a terrifying clarity, was fixed on Isabella. You, he said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. He started walking towards the stage, his movements no longer slow or uncertain, but filled with the coiled power of the CEO, the predator, the man who had been asleep and was now violently awake. Isabella's face drained of all color. She took a step back, her mask of composure shattering. Richard, darling, you're confused. You told me they were dead, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl as he reached the stage. You stood by my wife's empty grave and you lied. Panic flashed in Isabella's eyes. She turned to flee, but James was suddenly there at the bottom of the stage steps, blocking her path, his face grim and resolute. The doors are locked, madam, he said calmly. The police are on their way. Isabella was trapped. But Richard wasn't finished. He turned from her and walked towards Amelia, who stood waiting, tears finally streaming down her face. He stopped in front of her, his own eyes filled with a grief so profound it was a physical presence. He didn't see the doctor who had cared for him. He saw Adana's eyes, his daughter's face. 12 years of stolen birthdays, a lifetime of missed moments. He slowly raised a trembling hand and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. Amelia, he whispered, the name a broken, beautiful sound on his lips. My daughter. He pulled her into his arms, holding her, not as a man holds a woman, but as a father holds. The child he thought he had lost forever. And in the middle of the glittering ballroom, surrounded by the ruins of a life built on lies, they wept. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Isabella's arrest at the gala became the scandal of the decade, a story of greed and monstrous deception that played out on every news channel and blog. The evidence Amelia and James had gathered was overwhelming. The retired security guard's confession, Dr. Bellow's falsified records, the financial trails, and Adana's final, haunting letter. It was an open and shut case. Isabella, stripped of her diamonds and her dignity, was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to the arson that had been meant to cover her tracks. Victor, her shadowy associate, was apprehended by Interpol a week later while attempting to board a flight in Dubai. The empire of lies she had so carefully constructed for 12 years crumbled to dust in a matter of days. But for Richard and Amelia, the legal victory was a hollow echo compared to the monumental task that lay before them, rebuilding a relationship from the ashes of a stolen past. The days following the gala were a blur of raw, unfiltered emotion. There were long silences, punctuated by sudden bursts of tears. There were questions, so many questions, that hung heavy and unanswered in the air of the vast, empty mansion. Richard, now fully himself, was a man undone by grief and guilt. He would pace the study for hours, staring at the photo of Adana and baby Amelia, his face a mask of anguish. I should have known, he would repeat, his voice thick with self-recrimination. I should have felt that something was wrong. I should have protected you. Amelia, in turn, found herself navigating a minefield of conflicting feelings. There was a deep, instinctual love for the father she had just found, but it was tangled with the ingrained pain of a lifetime of abandonment. He was a stranger. Yet, he was the missing half of her soul. It was during one of these difficult evenings that they had their first real breakthrough. Amelia found Richard in the garden, standing by a bed of white roses, Adana's favorite. "She planted these the week you were born," he said, not looking at her. "She said they were for her two miracles, her daughter and her love." "You did love her," Amelia stated, the words more of a realization than a question. "More than my own life," he whispered, "and I failed her. I left you both unprotected." "You didn't know," Amelia said, echoing the same words of comfort she had once received. "Isabella's lie was perfect. She preyed on your grief." He finally turned to face her, his eyes hollow. "But a father should have a sixth sense. I let my work consume me. I was in London closing a deal when I should have been home." "You were building a future for us," Amelia countered gently. "That's what my mother always said. She was so proud of you." His head snapped up. "You remember her? You remember what she said?" Amelia smiled through her tears. "I don't remember her face clearly, but I remember her voice, I remember her stories, and I remember the song." In the quiet of the garden, as the sun began to set, they started to piece together the fragmented memories, weaving a shared history from his recollections and her feelings. He told her stories of her mother's rebellious spirit and infectious laugh. She told him about the locket, how she would hold it at night and imagine the father who wore the other half. They were not just father and daughter. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, finally finding each other on a deserted shore. The healing was slow, but it was steady. Richard, with Amelia by his side, began to re-engage with the world. He restructured the Equency Foundation, putting Amelia on the board and redirecting its mission to support single mothers and victims of medical fraud, turning Isabella's poison into a powerful antidote. He sold the cold, cavernous mansion in Banana Island and bought a smaller, warmer house by the sea, a place that echoed the happy memories of the old beach house, a place where they could build new ones. James, the loyal driver, became an indispensable part of their new family, a quiet, steadfast uncle figure to Amelia. The hospital, after issuing a public apology and firing the administrator, offered Amelia the position of head of resident training, but she politely declined. Her path, she realized, was no longer confined to the walls of a hospital. A year after the gala, on a clear, sunny morning, Richard and Amelia stood together in a small, peaceful cemetery overlooking the ocean. They had finally been able to give Adana a proper burial, her name inscribed on a simple marble headstone. They placed a bouquet of white roses on the fresh earth. "She would be so proud of you," Richard said, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "The doctor you've become, the woman you are." Amelia leaned her head against him. "She would be proud of us," she corrected. "We found our way back." As they stood there, a gentle breeze came in off the sea, carrying the scent of salt and roses. It felt like a whisper from the past, a blessing for the future. The story that had begun with a tragic accident and a world of lies had found its way, finally, to a place of truth, of healing, and of a love that memory could not lose and time could not break. It was not a fairy tale ending, but something far better, a real beginning. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Isabella's arrest at the gala became the scandal of the decade, a story of greed and monstrous deception that played out on every news channel and blog. The evidence Amelia and James had gathered was overwhelming. The retired security guard's confession, Dr. Bellow's falsified records, the financial trails, and Adana's final, haunting letter. It was an open and shut case. Isabella, stripped of her diamonds and her dignity, was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to the arson that had been meant to cover her tracks. Victor, her shadowy associate, was apprehended by Interpol a week later while attempting to board a flight in Dubai. The empire of lies she had so carefully constructed for 12 years crumbled to dust in a matter of days. But for Richard and Amelia, the legal victory was a hollow echo compared to the monumental task that lay before them, rebuilding a relationship from the ashes of a stolen past. The days following the gala were a blur of raw, unfiltered emotion. There were long silences, punctuated by sudden bursts of tears. There were questions, so many questions, that hung heavy and unanswered in the air of the vast, empty mansion. Richard, now fully himself, was a man undone by grief and guilt. He would pace the study for hours, staring at the photo of Adana and baby Amelia, his face a mask of anguish. "I should have known," he would repeat, his voice thick with self-recrimination. "I should have felt that something was wrong. I should have protected you, Amelia." In turn, found herself navigating a minefield of conflicting feelings. There was a deep, instinctual love for the father she had just found, but it was tangled with the ingrained pain of a lifetime of abandonment. He was a stranger, yet he was the missing half of her soul. It was during one of these difficult evenings that they had their first real breakthrough. Amelia found Richard in the garden, standing by a bed of white roses, Adana's favorite. "She planted these the week you were born," he said, not looking at her. "She said they were for her two miracles, her daughter and her love." "You did love her," Amelia stated, the words more of a realization than a question. "More than my own life," he whispered. "And I failed her. I left you both unprotected." "You didn't know," Amelia said, echoing the same words of comfort she had once received. "Isabella's lie was perfect. She preyed on your grief." He finally turned to face her, his eyes hollow. "But a father should have a sixth sense. I let my work consume me. I was in London closing a deal when I should have been home." "You were building a future for us," Amelia countered gently. "That's what my mother always said. She was so proud of you." His head snapped up. "You remember her? You remember what she said?" Amelia smiled through her tears. "I don't remember her face clearly, but I remember her voice. I remember her stories, and I remember the song." In the quiet of the garden, as the sun began to set, they started to piece together the fragmented memories, weaving a shared history from his recollections and her feelings. He told her stories of her mother's rebellious spirit and infectious laugh. She told him about the locket, how she would hold it at night, and imagine the father who wore the other half. They were not just father and daughter. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, finally finding each other on a deserted shore. The healing was slow, but it was steady. Richard, with Amelia by his side, began to re-engage with the world. He restructured the Equency Foundation, putting Amelia on the board and redirecting its mission to support single mothers and victims of medical fraud, turning Isabella's poison into a powerful antidote. He sold the cold, cavernous mansion in Banana Island and bought a smaller, warmer house by the sea, a place that echoed the happy memories of the old beach house, a place where they could build new ones. James, the loyal driver, became an indispensable part of their new family, a quiet, steadfast uncle figure to Amelia. The hospital, after issuing a public apology and firing the administrator, offered Amelia the position of head of resident training, but she politely declined. Her path, she realized, was no longer confined to the walls of a hospital. A year after the gala, on a clear, sunny morning, Richard and Amelia stood together in a small, peaceful cemetery overlooking the ocean, they had finally been able to give Adana a proper burial, her name inscribed on a simple marble headstone. They placed a bouquet of white roses on the fresh earth. "She would be so proud of you," Richard said, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "The doctor you've become, the woman you are." Amelia leaned her head against him. "She would be proud of us," she corrected. "We found our way back." As they stood there, a gentle breeze came in off the sea, carrying the scent of salt and roses. It felt like a whisper from the past, a blessing for the future. The story that had begun with a tragic accident and a world of lies had found its way, finally, to a place of truth, of healing, and of a love that memory could not lose and time could not break. It was not a fairy tale ending, but something far better, a real beginning. Imagine waking up in a hospital bed. The world is a blur of white sheets and muted beeps. Your own name a foreign word on a stranger's lips. Your past is a blank page. In a perfect world, a kind face would be waiting, a hand to hold, a voice to guide you back. But you probably wouldn't survive this world. You'd have forms to sign and bills to pay long before you remembered who you were supposed to pay them to. This is a story about a man who lost his memory, but found something far more valuable. It's a story about a daughter who was abandoned, but never stopped fighting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Dr. Amelia Adisa moved through the sterile corridors of Lagos Central Hospital like a ghost in blue scrubs. Her steps were quiet, efficient, her face a mask of professional calm that hid the exhaustion settled deep in her bones. At 28, she was one of the most promising residents in the cardiology unit, known for her steady hands and an unnerving ability to remain calm in the face of chaos. But outside these walls, her life was a study in silence. Her small apartment echoed with the absence of family. The only constant companion, a faded photograph of her mother and the half locket she wore around her neck. Its broken edge, a daily reminder of a story she only knew half of. The locket was her only inheritance, a small silver oval engraved with the words, "My dearest A." The rest of the name, like the other half of the locket, was missing. Lost to a past her mother refused to speak of until it was too late. Miles away, in a glass tower that pierced the Lagos skyline, Richard Ekwensi stared out at the city he owned. At 52, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name opened doors and silenced rooms. His business empire was vast, his wealth immeasurable. But his soul was a barren landscape. Since his first wife, Adana, had died in a fire 12 years ago, a part of him had died with her. He had remarried, of course. A man of his stature needed a partner. Isabella was perfect on paper, beautiful, sophisticated, and socially adept. But their marriage was a contract, a merger of interests, not of hearts. Their sprawling mansion in Banana Island felt less like a home and more like a museum, cold and beautiful and untouchable. "Richard, darling," Isabella's voice, smooth as silk, cut through his thoughts from the doorway of his